for you, it's represented pretty fucking clearly. Your folate's low. B12, I would say, is like low normal. And then your homocysteine is like sky fucking high. So I would speculate. I think first we can probably look at, let me just make sure I have the right. So this one you sent me over Instagram today, that one is from, let's see,
2016, I think.
Yeah. So like, was this the most recent one other than?
No, I have another test I did in August, September. It just literally just has the total testosterone, nothing else. It was, I got to get that. It's in my Medcan freaking thing, but I forgot my password. If I email them to basically give you the password, but I mean, I can share that number with you and send you the screenshot of it if you want. But basically except for this one, every testosterone test I've done has been within 600 to 660.
Okay. So I cut off the personal info on the top just in case, but just to verify for everyone, like this is his actual blood test. I just cropped off the top just in case there was like personal information on it that shouldn't be published on a video. So this was in 2016 and we had a luteinizing hormone of 7. So on the high end of normal, DHEA sulfate, like high adrenal production seemingly. So it seems like you're like, have good androgen production. Like a lot of people don't realize there's like trace androgens and all of the kind of like adrenal hormones that come from your adrenal gland are contributing as well. So that looks like healthy functioning. It's almost a little bit high. I would almost be interested to see your cortisol, but this is like a fucking 6-year-old test. So no point in that. But testosterone at 21.4 nanomoles per liter. Let me convert that to nanograms per deciliter. Nanomoles per liter to nanograms per deciliter.
That one's 640 or 620. I forget.
Right now on the screen share, can you only see this blood test still?
Yeah.
Okay. Just double checking. Okay. So 616. So
616. Okay.
Yeah. That looks pretty, like, it seems like you're pretty consistent, like realistically, like all the blood tests I've seen from you are like, 600 range essentially.
Yeah.
And then the estradiol at 90, we would have a 90 picomoles per liter, 2 picograms per milliliter. We would have, so proportionally, you'd have a 24 picogram per milliliter estradiol. So like at a glance, if we were just to say, and this is the free testosterone. So a lot of people are going to get confused when they see this because they see, okay, a free test. Oftentimes you'll see a reference range that goes up to like 30. Here we have up to 636. So this is a different method of calculation. Like here you look at the unit, they have picomole per liter, whereas the blood test we're going to look at in a sec, which is the one you just got done, is a nanograms per deciliter. And the reason, go ahead.
So I was going to ask you, is this the same standard of finding free testosterone?
No. Yeah. So what they do, see how it says underneath it, free testosterone is estimated from measuring total testosterone and sex hormone binding globulin using an algorithm. So this is estimated based on this number right here, this 39 shbg. So it's not actually like directly assessing the free test in your blood. Rather, it is assessing it based on a calculation between this and between this and kind of ballparking accordingly. So it's like a cheaper way to figure out your free T, but it's not necessarily accurate. So the gold standard is something called equilibrium dialysis, which is what we got done on your most recent test. And it's far more cost prohibitive, but it's the most accurate you could get. But I just want to like explain the reference ranges to people because they're going to see like this picomole per liter, 196 to 636. This is, the reference ranges are going to be different between LabCorp, Quest. Presumably this test was done in Canada, I'm assuming, or yeah. So like Canada uses different units of measurement too. So this is why you're going to see like this is not equivalent to, why is it 490 versus like 25 on another test? Like this can be compared by converting the units, but ultimately the equilibrium dialysis nanogram per deciliter is what we want to see, because your free test, your total test, we always look at what's the nanogram per deciliter total. That's what everyone's most familiar with between 250 to like 1,000. That's kind of like what everyone knows. So if we want to see what your free test is, like it just makes logical sense. The most accurate way to assess is like 2 to 3% or 2 to 4% in some cases is a free testosterone that is like proportional to your total test. And that's in the same unit of measurement though. Like you would want to see the nanogram per deciliter free test that goes with your nanogram per deciliter total, not some weird, random, extrapolated picomole per liter free test.
Have you seen a big difference in results if you do the conversion from that method of calculating free testosterone versus the exact one?
A little bit, yeah. So that's why we like to use this like more specific version. So let's get into, so can you see this now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is like the most expensive, like, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention at the end of the talk about the training and the diet and stuff, which I should have plugged your programs. I want to do that before we get into the blood work. So what is, if anyone wants to see or try your approach to training, to diet, like we kind of like went over at a surface level here, but to actually like follow a structured plan and get like guidance on exactly what to do, like where should they go?
Go to moviestarBody.com. That's my brand new Movie Star Masterclass, a 4-month program to get lean. It's got, my protocols for cutting, lean bulking. So check that out. That's the single program I'm doing now, and people are getting great results on that program.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I would definitely recommend for naturals, like that's definitely a good go-to start. Like as far as if you're like unsure what to do, you've tried the whole crash dieting thing, you've plateaued at low calories, and you just don't know what to do. You've ended up skinny fat, or you just like don't even know like how to program correctly. I think Greg is one of the best naturals in the industry to kind of like get that insight from and try out their program.
Sick. And you can also, you can also, like, I just set this up. You can also DM me Transform, and I have a whole little quiz you can go through and find your body type. And I give you some good tips on the program. So either go to moviestarbody.com or DM me the word Transform, and you'll get exactly my prescription for your body type.
So based on the last blood test, the LH, by the way, if we were going to like speculate about if you're natural or not, obviously, we don't have like a full drug test spectrum or anything like that. But at the time in 2016, at the time of that test, like I didn't even see you talking about gonadotropins. You were mostly talking about carbon isotope ratio testing and stuff like that. Like I don't think people really knew how to interpret blood work to assess negative feedback or gonadotropin output of LH and FSH. So I'm just going to like give the benefit of the doubt that at the 2016 test that we just looked at, the LH was the high end of normal. It would be very hard to fake that if you were unnatural. So just putting that out there. Now getting into the 2022 test, part of this was prompted by a video I did on Paul Sklar. He's like this, 50-year-old guy who has a great physique. A lot of people accuse him of being unnatural. He posted a testosterone result essentially as proof that he's natural. Like, look at my total test. And like, that was it. So a bunch of people tagged me in it. And I basically said like the total test means nothing. This is the test you would need to do to prove that, for a decent amount of time, you are natural. And as long as you're able to maintain your key lifts for a proportional time, like around this test, the likelihood is high that you're natural. Because if you came off hormones for the test, we would see that indicated likely in the blood work. But even if you took an appropriate amount of time off to kind of like proactively prepare for the test, we would see this dictated in your strength metrics, decreasing suddenly for no apparent reason. So for him, like, I don't even follow his content, to be honest. I just got tagged in the shit and I just said like, this is what you need to do. A lot of his followers got really pissed off, which is dumb because I was just saying like a total test means nothing. And this is what you need to get. He ended up going and getting a follow-up blood test right after that, which I commend him on, which I still have to do the video follow-up on that. But Greg commented in the comment section, like unprompted, and said, I'd be down to get my blood work assessed too. It was like, I didn't do a natty or not on Greg. I didn't do any of this shit. He just like randomly was like, hey, like, would you do this with me? Let me know. And I said, sure. Like, we'll get a panel done with Merrick Health. Like, are you able to go right away? And he said, yeah. So this is like unprompted. I didn't make a video on him and him went and like, plan this out or some shit. Like he just happened to be like ready to go. So I think that is fairly reinforcing that this was not like a planned thing on your end to go get blood work at some particular time where you cleared shit out of your system. And at least for you, something that I think goes in your favor more so than Paul. Not that I'm saying Paul is unnatural or something. I'll get into his stuff separately in a different video, but you actually show like PRs constantly tracked on your Instagram, on your social media. You were like very meticulous about showing your strength metrics, which is ultimately, when you look at a blood test, we can't say for certain anything unless we also have corroborating like performance metrics that aren't diminishing, because it takes a certain amount of time for your physique to deteriorate after hormone deprivation if you're on exogenous hormones. But like performance numbers too, you'll see those start to dip pretty quick if you were unnatural. And then all of a sudden you pulled everything out for a blood test, and you've been tracking those like for fucking years at this point, I'd say, on your Instagram. Yeah. So like if you prepared for this test in some capacity, we would see this reflected in numbers not looking as good on your Instagram over time. Like something would go off. Like we've seen a lot of guys on YouTube that, showed all of a sudden they gained 50 pounds on their bench, and then it would go down, and then they have some excuse about their programming is different or this or that. But it was like, it's pretty fucking obvious what was going on a lot of the time. So for you though, I just want to give that disclaimer of like, go look at the performance numbers on Greg's Instagram. Like I have not seen any dips in performance. Like, have you, like, I don't follow it super meticulously, but has your bench, all of your main compounds, like essentially stayed the same for the past, 6 months or whatever?
Yeah. 100 within 10 pounds. I did cut a little bit. But yeah, pretty much same thing. My standards are usually like, 120 pound incline for 10 reps and 110 pound dumbbell shoulder presses. And all those lifts are there on point.
So this is the tough thing for, I don't know if you've seen the Matt Does Fitness drug test thing that we were collaborating on, is he was going to get drug tested, like full blown, like WADA approved testing with carbon isotope ratio testing, potentially with the concurrent blood work, like everything was bulletproof, but he was also going to show his lifts while we were randomly testing him. And he just got injured and like blew out his Achilles or something. So now he's like in a situation where like it costs like thousands of dollars to do these tests too. So for him, he has to like wait to do the testing now if he wants to do it properly, because he can't show that his deadlift and his squat and everything are staying the same. So for him, it's fucking tough. And I'll probably do a video on that separately too. But for you, it's good because we have like these numbers throughout time and we can kind of give like a baseline judgment. But a lot of this too is going to be looking at your actual like health metrics too, because I did notice some aberrations in folate. So in this anemia profile, everything looks reasonable except for your folic acid is low, and B12 actually is not. While it looks in normal range, I would actually say this B12 might be a bit on the low side based on what I think you're genetically predisposed to, as we'll get to shortly. So everything in your CBC looks good. I don't think there's any like need to dig into this too elaborately. It looks representative of a natural. Like I don't see any like elevations in the red blood cell, hemoglobin, hematocrit. Everything looks in line with what I would like. Typically, you would see some level of elevation in androgen users, except for guys. Like if you're on TRT, maybe you wouldn't, or guys who are doing like therapeutic phlebotomies and donating blood or whatever. But ultimately, like I can say this looks natural. Getting to your cholesterol. So this breakdown with an NMR lipo profile, we see high, like your HDL is above 50, it's 56, which in general, guys on gear or on TRT are going to have a tough time keeping a HDL above 50. Most of the time, guys on gear are well below 40. And guys on TRT have a tough time even keeping it close to 50. So I would say that's definitely.
Why is that?
There's like this, the process, I forget exactly what the enzymatic process is called, but it's like hepatic lipase is like increased or something that basically causes a degradation of HDL. So like it's basically impossible for your body to sustain adequate HDL in the serum when you are on exogenous androgens through the interaction with this process. So for you don't have this androgen like upregulation of this thing going on. So you have like a normal lipid parameters supported from the lack of exogenous hormone use, presumably. Like it's just in general, it's very rare to see like a good looking HDL on guys who are like, it's even hard to plan for this. If you were trying to like get away with hormone use on paper, there's a lot of things you could do to mask it, but the HDL is like pretty fucking hard to mask as a guy on gear. So I would just say that at a glance is in your favor and your triglycerides look good. from a health standpoint, people are going to see the LDL-C that it's high and be like, oh shit, is that like, plaque buildup city, or like what's going on there? So I did a podcast with somebody named Paul Saladino recently, who's like an animal-based diets, proponent, and used to do carnivore diet. And in general, if you want to hear like a more scientific breakdown of the lipid parameters, I would definitely recommend hearing his description on the progression of atherosclerosis and plaque buildup. But from just a summarization, if we see this LDL-C high, I don't see that as problematic inherently, unless you also are like metabolically unhealthy. So for you, we would look at things like fasting insulin. We would look at things like potentially inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, and we can kind of infer like how well your body is able to tolerate your current diet model, how much plaque you may be accumulating. Now, some of this is like very heavily debated in the nutrition community about like the importance of LDL-C on paper, and like if it should be, below like 100 or even below 70, apparently is the number where it's impossible to build plaque up. But in general, like you're in a deficit a lot of the time, or you have a very healthy like proportion of macros. You are like very, very lean. You're metabolically healthy at a like perceptive, like first glance, as well as when I look at your fasting insulin levels. If we scroll all the way down, that is like the main marker of how much your pancreas is like working to sustain your blood sugar levels. So like if you're fasting, which you were at the time of this test, right? Yeah. So he was fasting. So we would see in general like a higher insulin level for guys who are like less metabolically healthy, because they're pushing out more insulin to keep their glucose at a normal level, because their body is like less metabolically apt to handle whatever they're doing in their current lifestyle. So insulin resistance is higher rather than being insulin sensitive, etc. So for you, when we go down to the, hopefully I didn't scroll past it, fasting insulin 1.3 low. So it's like it's not, I would definitely get this checked again on the next follow-up we do, but this is like, if anything, representative of like extreme metabolic health and insulin sensitivity. Like this is like the pinnacle of like metabolic like perfection from what I would speculate in a fasting level. So for you, it would be interesting to see like how quickly you're able to like pull your glucose levels back down after you eat like a carb dense meal. But from what, at a glance, the fact that you had this like fasted in the morning or late afternoon, which is notable as well when we get to the testosterone levels, the time of the test. What was the time of the test again?
Well, just before 2 p.m.
Yeah. Okay. So it was
1:50 p.m.
Yeah. Okay. So the fact that your 1.3 insulin is like very, very, I don't know, reinforcing. It's kind of irrelevant to the anabolic discussion, but it's more so just like your health parameters. Like this is very good. And this is like something shooting as close to like this 2.6 number is like what people should strive for when it comes to metabolic health at a fasting insulin level. So your pancreas does not have to work very hard, because your glucose levels are sustained at 78 without even like really having to try. So you have like no stress of your beta cells in your pancreas. Your diet is like pretty fucking dialed in. You're lean, insulin sensitive as fuck. It looks really good. So this LDL-C, I'm not like too worried about that. In the presence of metabolic, like poor metabolic health, I would be more concerned about this being atherosclerotic in like nature, but I would keep an eye on it just for the sake of caution. But with the other markers being like quite in line with like a very fit individual, I'm not overly concerned about this number. So I just want to put it out there.
Cool.
Also, to be noted, I'm not a fucking lipidologist or cardiologist, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt and run these things by your own doctor when you're interpreting your lipids. Don't just defer to a YouTuber when it comes to your interpretation of blood test panels. And this is why we have experts and doctors at Merrick Health who will actually interpret this stuff for you. This is just for the sake partially of entertainment, and because presumably, like seeing me talk about it with Greg is like a bit of a more unique scenario, but this is the stuff your doctor would interpret through Merrick Health, not me, obviously. So anyways, getting to the rest of the stuff, this was the lipids all look good. Nothing to me was concerning and was representative of a natural athlete. Thyroid looked good. It doesn't look like your body's like too stressed trying to produce thyroid hormone. Like your TSH is a representation of the stimulating hormone that is signaling how much T4 to then produce, which downstream leads to T3 conversion. This looks good. I wouldn't really, try and elaborate too much more on that. This is like a proxy for metabolism in some scenario, in some context, but for you, it looks good enough that I don't think it's worth elaborating on much further than that. But if you have like a higher than a 3 TSH consistently, I would probably like at least bring it up with your provider and just like see, I don't know, maybe dig a bit further and see why your thyroid's like working so hard to like produce the amount of hormone necessary. But for you, I wouldn't really, dig into this too much more. Comprehensive metabolic panel. We're looking at your kidney parameters as well as your liver function, and everything looks good. Kidney function here is estimated glomerular filtration rate based on this creatinine, which is a more rough metric to assess kidney function. And down on the test later, we have a more insightful and sensitive parameter to test it, which we'll get to shortly when we get there. But the only thing that was concerning, and these AST and ALT are like perfect, which is liver function. And in general, anabolics users are typically going to have higher liver enzymes. So this, it's not uncommon to see guys hovering like, 40, 50, 60 who are on anabolics. And that's like sometimes way fucking higher for on oral anabolic steroids too. Even SARMs, you see this number like very, very close to the triple digits, if not like well into the triple digits in guys who are using oral compounds. So this looks good to me from a health standpoint too. Alkaline phosphatase being low. So for this number, like personally for me, this is like, it's not something I'm overly familiar with, but as far as I recall, it was like an enzyme found in a bunch of different areas of the body, like liver, kidneys, digestive system, and leakage into the bloodstream can be representative of like liver damage to some extent. So this is why it's still featured in the like metabolic panel section. So for me, when I see low, I might get a follow-up just to assess like if it's a transient like aberration that was low, but low is better than high. Obviously, high would indicate liver stress likely. But for this, I would just do a follow-up to then see if it's consistently low. And then from there, kind of like dial in if there's actually a problem and what that is. But it may be tied into the methylation impairments that we'll get into shortly, which is what I speculate to be a genetic predisposition. This urine analysis, specific gravity, it might be, did you drink like a fuck ton of water beforehand or something?
I don't recall drinking a fuck ton of water, but like I definitely was drinking quite a bit of water.
Okay, so this might just be like overly diluted urine from having like drank a lot of water beforehand. Like everything else looks good, so that's the only reason why it's on the low end of normal. So I'm not really concerned about it. I just assume that this is like a very diluted sample, but yeah, that's kind of just my stance on that. I'm not too concerned about it. Getting into the gonadotropin. So these are kind of representative of pituitary output of hormones that lead to intratesticular testosterone production and sperm production and maturation. So luteinizing hormone is the main thing that acts on the Leydig cells to then produce testosterone. So guys who are on TRT even, this is something that's going to be shut down. It's not like a dose dependent manner necessarily, because even at like a replacement level of test, you're going to be sub therapeutic, like this 1.7 low end of the reference range, 1.5 low end of the reference range. If you look at a guy on gear, his LH and FSH are like undetectable often, or like 0.02 or 0.03 or something like that. So for you, having an FSH and LH in range means that you have normal HPTA axis function, where once your body has a certain amount of testosterone that it needs to produce, it signals to your hypothalamus to then spit out something called gonadotropin releasing hormone. It goes to your pituitary gland, and then it tells your pituitary, you need to produce a certain amount of LH and FSH, which goes down to your testes to then spit out a certain amount of test. So the fact that this is in range is like representative of somebody who has natural function right now. So it would be very hard to fake this if at the time of the test you were on anything, like even TRT. Even if you came off of TRT, the likelihood is pretty fucking low that you would be able to clear the hormone in such a short time frame, go do the test, and have a restoration of this. Because anybody who's on TRT or exogenous hormones, you would have a clearance time of, even with a short ester, at least, like, I'm assuming it would be fucking unfathomable to think you were on like no ester testosterone that's like in and out of your system in a day, just randomly at the time of me making this Instagram post, which wasn't even targeting you whatsoever. So like, even if you were on TRT, you would be on like a longer ester, like an enanthate or recipionate, that would take weeks to clear out of your system before you would see these numbers come back into the normal range. So me just looking at this at a glance, I see LH and FSH in range, and I'm thinking the fact that this was unprompted and you just went and got it done on a whim, and I didn't like make a fucking natty or not on you, and then you were like, oh, like, let me like plan for this or something. Like, it just looks natural, like plain as day. So that is definitely in your favor, and definitely worth mentioning, because a lot of people might think, you know, oh, you just, if you had the ability to plan for these tests, like perhaps there is a way you could get around it. Yeah, like I've talked about this many times, circumventing drug testing, how you would plan even for random tests to occur. The thing is, though, is when they do random tests in via WADA, it's kind of baffling, but they don't even test for this. So they'll test your urine for like all of the steroids. They'll test your blood for like, you know, they'll actually test for EPO from a red flag in your, you know, hematology way up here. They'll check your red blood cell count, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and see if there's like weird fluctuations, and then see if they should test you for EPO. But they will not do something as basic as use that same blood to test for LH and FSH, which to me is fucking baffling, because it's like, if I was on a designer steroid or something, my LH and FSH would be in the gutter. But like, you're not going to just like randomly be able to figure out that a guy's on a designer steroid that's undetectable. But at least if we had some clue as to their hormones are suppressed, it would be like, huh, this guy has shut down for like no reason, so he must be using something. Like, why else would your hormones be shut down unless you were doing the most aggressive weight cut in fucking history, essentially? So for me, I see an LH and FSH in range, and I think natural. It's just baffling to me, and I feel like it should be made clear that even at the highest Olympic level testing, they don't test LH and FSH, which is fucking dumb and makes no sense. But anyways,
is there a way someone could go on TRT and take drugs to stimulate LH and FSH?
Yeah, so that would be something that they also test for in the urine analysis, is those drugs that would be like fertility enhancing.
Right.
For you, though, the only way you would be able to do that is if you administered like recombinant LH and recombinant LH, recombinant LH and recombinant FSH, or use something called HMG. So most people, first of all, in Canada, the level of connection and access you would need to get pharmaceutical grade HMG or LH and FSH on their own is like wild, how connected you would have to be randomly. In addition to that, if you pin them trying to get around this in order to plan for like a Derek analysis of your blood work, because again, if you were doing Olympic testing, you don't got to worry about this at all. But if you're being like analyzed by me, you would have to hope that your random shot of bioidentical LH didn't push your levels into like higher territory too. Because if I saw this number was like 10, because you pinned some like random amount of LH into your belly fat and was like, oh, I'm going to get around the test by being on TRT and taking literal fucking LH, the likelihood that you're going to like accurately target the amount of LH that makes you look natural and not overshoot it by some amount and time the test accurately too is like baffling, psychotic levels of planning that I would not imagine anyone would do unprompted. Like the likelihood that you traveled to Miami over the border and brought illegally HMG or recombinant LH and FSH with you would be like mind-bogglingly fucked up, because it's not like you were planning for this either. So you would have had to smuggle some shit, somehow know I was going to make this post on blood work, and then be ready to go like a day beforehand and pin some like indiscriminate amount of LH and FSH and hope that it was going to land in this reference range. And it's not like you have control over, you get to see the blood work before I do. Like my lab literally fucking sends me the blood work too. So anyway, that's like the planning for this would be impossible to a level of not even Olympic athletes are doing this. So I'll just put it that way.
I heard that skepticism. Oh, if you see the gonadotropins, you see LH, FSH, well, you know, you could take fertility hormones to do that.
Some people think if you took HCG, they're like, oh, just take a certain amount of HCG, which is something that's pretty readily accessible. That is a mimic of LH. It comes from like pregnant women's urine, essentially. And that is, again, not actual LH. So you would actually see your LH and FSH go to 0 on exogenous HCG. So the thing that most people think you would cheat with, which is HCG, and you can get prescribed pretty easily from a TRT clinic, is something that stimulates Leydig cells to produce testosterone. You'd use it while you're on TRT, potentially, if you want to maintain fertility, or like maintain good fertility is a more accurate way to represent that statement. But it doesn't do anything to increase your LH and FSH like people think it does. So the likelihood that you could plan for this with drugs that are extremely difficult to procure and get prescriptions for, and essentially impossible to get in Canada, you would have had, and the amount of planning that goes into smuggling this over the border, fucking having it on hand, knowing exactly how much to pin to get your shit into range, knowing I was going to make a blood test post on some other guy, mind-boggling psychotic levels of planning. So I am pretty confident this is natural. So
can you give me 2 seconds, by the way?
Yeah, sure.
2 seconds.
Okay, recording is back. Let me get this blood work back up. Share screen, preview. Okay, can you see it again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it still on the screen when I go like this? I'm just checking.
Yeah, it's still on the screen.
Okay, so we just went over the gonadotropins, and let me just double check. We are indeed recording. It says recording on my thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I'm like fucking hyper paranoid about that stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so we are at the, actually, I'm just going to double check myself 1 sec. Okay, pause recording. Okay, yeah, it's definitely there. Preview. Okay, so the gonadotropins, we just went over all that stuff. I think we've ruled that part is essentially beat to death. So testosterone total in free. So this is the interesting thing, is people see a disproportionately high free testosterone. They're probably going to assume, like, typically we see that represented in individuals who are on TRT, to be honest. Like, we see a disproportionately high free relative to the total T, and it's because SHBG is lower. But that is in general based on an SHBG, like, estimated free T. So remember earlier, I was talking about how the reference ranges are different and the units of measurement are different. The gold standard is equilibrium dialysis. So basically, this thing we use to assess your free T is literally a far more sensitive and direct measurement, whereby we have actual nanograms per deciliter. And you see the reference interval, the reference range is only 5 to 21. So for me, I think this is far too low, because when they use a free testosterone estimation through it's called free testosterone direct, and they use something called an immunoassay to assess it, it's not as accurate, but the reference range is far more forgiving as far as how high it goes. So, like, in some countries, they'll have a total T that only goes up to like 700 or something. Obviously, if a guy's at 800 total T naturally, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's on gear. Like, you have to look at the whole picture to really understand what's going on. So I see this 21 is the high end of the reference range. And that is based on this reference range, frankly, just not going high enough. Like, we see guys who have 1,000 totals, maybe they'll be at like 30 and they could be natural still. This is not a range that I think it needs to be like 5 to like 30 personally. And in our clinic at Merrick Health, we will typically base hormone optimization parameters around like a high end of around 30. So getting to your SHBG in this total, like this total 515, we speculated it was lower a little bit than your previous results, which were more around like the 600, low 600s range, because of time of testing. So it was in the afternoon, as well as shit sleep that you had multiple days because of like construction and stuff like that. And also, I think you had like some other factors. You were like drinking a couple days prior or something.
Yeah, I was in Miami a lot, so I was drinking a lot. I didn't drink the day before, but the week leading up, minus the day before, I drank moderately. I'd say 3 times that week, 5, 6 drinks.
And air conditioning was not working, so it was too hot in the room too, as well.
Yeah. So my sleep, the big thing definitely was like my sleep was, especially the night before, my sleep was really, really bad. Okay. But
other than that, you didn't lift for 72 hours prior, which is good. as far as people watching, this is something to note. If you're going to look at your kidney and liver parameters, they can be artificially skewed if you lift like heavy as fuck a day prior to your test. So I just want to make that clear. But the sleep, I would imagine, had the most impactful on this result, because it's not that much different, honestly. Like it could have just been like the time of day too. Like you had it done at 1:45 or whatever it was. Like it's not like it's at fucking 300 or something. So 515, based on diurnal rhythms, your testosterone can fluctuate up and down like 200, 300 nanograms per deciliter even. I'm not thinking this is like from a health perspective, even like I think you could chalk this up to time of day and bad sleep. And you're probably on the next test, you might be back at 600. So, and we could do that follow up. As far as free testosterone, so this is 21.97, which is good for your total T, but it is not representative what I would say is like actual super physiological territory. So in general, if somebody saw like 1,000 or 1,100 total T, like that in general for most reference ranges is like super physiological. Based on the equilibrium dialysis test that we do, which is the most accurate for finding out what your free T actually is, the reference range is too low in my opinion. I'm not just saying that to fucking like cover your ass or something, because when we look at your shbg number, it is 31.1. So that's like dead in the middle essentially almost of shbg. So in general, the way it works is your body produces a certain amount of testosterone and it floats around in circulation, and the way it gets like actually transported to target tissues and also modulated of how much is like freely available to use to make sure you're not like hyper androgen dominant all the time, is we have this binding protein, which is shbg, as well as something called albumin and other binding proteins, which are less relevant because shbg is the main one that binds up the most testosterone in the body, as well as DHT and to a lesser extent estrogen. But this number at 31.1, in general, guys who are on gear, we see this single digits or below 16.5 almost every single fucking time. Like it's other than HDL, this number, maintenance of it is quite difficult on exogenous androgens for the most part. So for me, I see this is a reinforcing number of natural status, and the number of the free test number, when you look at it relative to the shbg on paper, it looks a lot more normal than you would otherwise be assumed based on like an aberrant high result. Like we see 4.26%, 21.97 high above the reference range. You automatically think potentially on something, but the gonadotropins don't reinforce this. The shbg doesn't reinforce this. My speculation is that you might have a high DHT production, a high DHT level, which I didn't test in this test, which we can add to your panel separately on the next one. But basically shbg, it's this binding protein that like binds up testosterone, DHT, and estrogen. And then it's kind of like proportional hierarchy of binding affinity, which is like the likelihood or propensity of it to bind up a hormone. DHT is like magnitudes higher than testosterone. So if you have high DHT, the shbg is mostly going to be occupying this DHT versus your testosterone lesser so and estrogen even lesser so. So it could, if you have a high DHT level, be more free testosterone in circulation, not as a result of low shbg, which is what we see with androgen users. Rather, it is your DHT being high that's just occupying all the shbg. So your testosterone that would otherwise be bound by it, there's more freely in circulation because you have so much DHT potentially, which we would have to find.
Where's the DHT produced?
Like the enzyme that produces it, you mean? Or
okay. Yeah. I mean, you have your DHAE, the one that's related to, production. Yeah.
There's an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, which is like the thing that finasteride inhibits for hair loss prevention. That enzyme produces DHT. Basically, your testosterone can either remain as testosterone, or it can aromatize into estrogen, or it can 5-alpha reduce into DHT. And if you have more 5-alpha reduction to DHT through use of like creatine might upregulate this, certain things. Do you use creatine on a daily basis?
I go on and off. I haven't used creatine in a few months. So
it's something you should use for health purposes, by the way, for your methylation stuff, but we'll get to that shortly. So As a follow-up, I would want to check your DHT just to see like why this free test is high. But again, this high is like, it's not that high. If I saw like a 28 or a 29, I'd be like, that is weird for your total T being 515. But we're using this assay that's like highly sensitive. It's not the same as seeing a 21 on a free direct immunoassay. And I know I'm speaking gibberish for a lot of people right now. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about? But at the end of the day, this free test is a far more expensive and sensitive assay that I think, and it is in the literature, the gold standard. It's just most people don't get it because it's cost prohibitive. So for us, I wanted to do like everything as high quality as possible for Greg's test and kind of like show the elaborate stuff we go through at Merrick Health to make sure everything's like fully fucking dialed in. And this 21 is not representative of like a high free T, in my opinion, or else we would see this shbg being much lower. Like if he actually had a disproportionately high free based on low binding proteins, this shbg would be like 10 or something. So for me, I think this is something we can retest on the next one, but this is like, this looks good. Like, I think this is like a good reading. That means you have healthy amount of free testosterone that may be a tad high, but I speculate it's from your DHT level. That's just, yeah. So
just two questions for you. So, 515 for me is low. I've done my testosterone test, 5 times, I think. And it's always been like 620, 650, 610. Do you think if my testosterone, my sleep was good, X, Y, and Z, and my testosterone came back at 615, do you think my free testosterone would be 20% higher or not?
Potentially, yeah. But that would be like ultimately your free test is dictated by how much total there is. So yeah, it could be higher too. But again, the kind of level we see at like the maxed out individual who is like manually administering replacement therapy, we see this closer to like 30 in general. So like for me, like we aim kind of general terms for guys on TRT, because again, it's kind of like wherever you get symptom relief is where your TRT dose is best, ideally, like minimum effective dose. But the optimized zone for free T is between 20 and 30. So like when I see 21.97, this is like in the optimal zone, but it's not like steroid level territory, is kind of like the overarching conclusion of that. So,
and do you think someone's better off if they have like total testosterone 622 free T versus total testosterone 817 free T? Like, do you think does at the end of the day, is it like literally just how much free testosterone that's going to make a difference for building muscle and physique, or does total testosterone matter too?
They both matter, but it's more so your androgen receptor content in the muscles and your actual like gene transcription that affects how much you can like make use of those hormones. So like I see some of the best naturals, like for example, there's this guy on our Gorilla Mind athlete team. His name's Lex Little. His testosterone is like 500 or something, but he has like the nuttiest physique of a 20-year-old you'll ever fucking see. And he's totally natural. And this is like proved through, he was WADA drug tested with a concurrent blood test at the same time. And he got like PR level lifts at the same time. Yeah. And he had like a normal looking total test and like a very normal looking free test. So ultimately there are some guys who have like shitty physiques on like 800 total tests. It doesn't mean they're going to be jacked. It's ultimately like your genetic response to those hormones. So like, yeah, you could probably build more muscle with like a higher total, and the free, yeah, if you had more bound up, you could maybe have less muscle building potential than if you had a higher free, but that would be at the detriment potentially of other health markers too. Like you would have more sympathetic drive, like you would be more like redlined on a day-to-day basis. It might be harder to sleep. It might be more agitated. Like there's definitely a happy medium, and your body, when it's natural, is pretty fucking good about balancing it out. So like for you, like, I don't necessarily see this as like bad, or I don't know, like to me, it seems a little bit high to a point that I would retest it for sure and just like see why it's high. Like maybe it's the DHT being high and that's why, but I don't necessarily see, if you were to compare a guy with an 800 total and like a 17 free versus a guy with a 600 total and a 22 free, if they had the exact same genetics and everything was fucking exactly the same, I don't necessarily know that I'd see like a massive or like a quantifiable difference in terms of outcome. Like maybe you could argue the guy with the free T is a little bit better off from like a I don't know, like drive perspective in the gym. Maybe he gets a bit more muscle out of it. But there is something to be said about the total testosterone level too, and how much is available to actually use. It's like you could argue the guy with 800, the only reason he has a lower free T is because his body is like trying to bind up more of the total. It's kind of up for speculation. I don't think it's that important. I just think that as long as your binding proteins are good, you don't have too low of a proportion and not too high. Like guys on keto diets will typically see this 31 would be like fucking 70, 80, 90, like that high, to a point where if you're dieting and you have an shbg of 90, you have like no free testosterone essentially. And you're like waking up with no morning wood, you have no sex drive, you have the like equivalent kind of function of a guy who has like no test, even though your total T on paper is like 500. So
yeah, I literally experienced that when I did low carb.
Yeah. So ultimately, the overarching thing is between 20 and 30 is what I see like the optimized male at. And I think 21.97 is like pretty dialed in. It's just slightly proportionally higher than your total. But I think follow-up testing would be useful to see if your DHT is like ridiculously high for some reason. But ultimately, as long as your LH and FSH are in range, your SHBG isn't crushed into the ground by exogenous hormones, HDL looks good. Like I can pretty fucking confidently say like this is still natural based on all of the other factors for sure. This is just a metric most people are quite unfamiliar with because no one does high sensitivity testing. This is something that's unique to our platform that I push for because I want the most like stringent parameters. Like some people who have normal looking free T that use the cheap immunoassay test might have a similar level to you if they did the high sensitivity test. So I just want to make that clear because I know there's going to be a lot of kind of like ambiguity around like why this reference range is so low. Like what's the difference between the free T that normally is on paper that goes up to 28 or 29. So ultimately we do still want to see this at 20 to 30 for an optimized male, in my opinion.
For naturals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, even guys on replacement therapy, because that's like guys on replacement therapy are guys who presumably need to be on hormone assistance to have good hormone levels in their blood. So if you were trying to replicate what a good natural is, you would want to see that free test at like 20 to 30. So the likelihood is low that you're ever going to have a natural with close to 30 free T. That's like very fucking unlikely. But that's like the line in the sand where like optimized versus like hormonally assisted really is kind of blurred nowadays too. So it's kind of hard to say, like, could you even get to replicate natural levels on TRT without fucking with the HDL, without fucking with the SHBG, without fucking with the hematology? It's kind of difficult to like dial it in exactly, but like an optimized male for like maxed out production or maxed out hormonal function without being too androgen dominant is typically like 20 to 30. So anyway, moving into this is a cystatin C. It's the most accurate way in blood to assess your kidney function. So this is a far more accurate assessment of your it's hard to fucking say, estimated glomerular filtration rate than the creatinine calculated one that we had at the top here. So this is, where is it? This creatinine is used to calculate this number in the metabolic panel, but the cystatin C is a far more accurate way to assess it. And it's in line. It's like the gold standard of blood work. So we always add this separately for like high sensitivity kidney check, essentially, for individuals. And I actually have a low cystatin C too. This is not concerning in my opinion at all. I would definitely do a follow-up on the next one just to see what it's at again. But ultimately low, closer to the 0.6 is representative of better filtration in your kidneys. Like that's why your GFR is so high here, 138. The lower this number is, in general, the worse your kidney function is. So this number, as you age, just by deterioration of your organs, goes down and down and down to a point that if anyone lived long enough, they would probably have kidney failure. If you didn't die from cancer, you would eventually have heart failure, kidney failure, probably one of those two things. So, and that's kind of like the shitty fucking paradox of being a human is like organs can only live for so long. Even if you manage to live a long time, eventually you get cancer or kidneys fuck up or heart fucks up, unfortunately. But anyway, this is good to me, and this is representative of like high tier kidney function. I would get a follow-up on this, but it's like almost representative of like too good of kidneys, as dumb as that sounds. So anyways, we'll get a follow-up on that next time, but this has nothing to do with androgen use. If anything, we would see this being higher and this number lower if you're abusing androgens for sure. Hemoglobin A1C, this is a representation of just like your average like blood glucose levels over time and your insulin sensitivity metrics. This is like a very rough way to assess pre-diabetes, diabetes, glycemic control. It's fucking great. I wouldn't read too much into this. We already know your fasting insulin is like rock bottom. So that in itself is the like gold standard for assessing insulin sensitivity metrics. So this is great. Wouldn't read into this too much more. Alpha fetoprotein, this is like a liver cancer metric. Looks fine. DHA sulfate, this means your adrenal function seemingly is like high normal, like good. Cortisol is a bit on the high side, but I think it's more so because like actually no, it's right in line based on the time of the test. So I would say this is good. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Like maybe you could argue that it's a bit high based on this being a PM test, but having your sleep fucked up is going to be one of the main things that contributes to like hypercortisol, whatever the scientific term is, hypercortisolemic or whatever the fuck. Like having higher cortisol is going to be impacted highly from poor sleep. So I would just get this retested. But to me, I'm not too concerned about it based on the context going into the test. This can be problematic for individuals who are natural with low T, by the way. A lot of them, they think that they need TRT when in reality, their sleep is just fucked up and they have like their adrenals are like overworked and they're in a state of like hypercortisol dominance, which can have like negative feedback essentially, whereby you produce less testosterone. So a lot of people have low T. They need to look at this number as well as assess their sleep metrics and see like what's going on. Because sometimes fixing sleep could like correct a low test level. And some people, they think they need TRT when they don't. Let's see. Prostate specific antigen. This looks good. IGF-1 is pretty fucking good considering that you're like, how many calories have you been eating lately?
Around that test, I was eating like maintenance 2,600.
Okay. Well, that's like pretty in line then if you have a decent amount of carbs in your diet. And like, again, the only thing somebody might be able to speculate is if you're using GH, which again is not going to keep your lifts up. So even if you're on like a replacement amount of GH, you might have like be able to get away with 1 or 2 units and get your IGF to like 240 if you had low normal levels naturally. But that would be super speculative and ultimately would not be something that helps hold your strength at all. So like, I don't see this as a representation. Like it's literally natural levels. It's just high normal. So to me, this is like a good response of your body's ability to generate growth factors in the liver and looks natural. So I wouldn't read too much into it. Reverse T3.
That one help with, that's going to help with putting on muscle, be on the higher end of that.
Potentially, yeah. Like there is some argument in the enhanced community whether having higher IGF-1 actually helps or not. But we do see in cancer development, higher IGF-1 definitely accelerates cancer cell proliferation. So based on some of the extrapolations we can do, like people use IGF-1 to basically cause proliferation of satellite cells, which can then donate nuclei to then be able to essentially create more myonuclei you can induce hypertrophy in. So if you have more myonuclei in the muscle, you can then induce hypertrophy in more cells that leads to a greater, like bigger muscle fucking fiber essentially. So yeah, a higher IGF-1, you could use that as a proxy for greater ability to build muscle, but that's based on the assumption that your body's like receptors are actually able to make use of it. Because again, you could have 1,000 total testosterone, but that guy has a way worse physique than you who has 515. You know what I mean? So it's like their androgen receptors and gene expression is going to dictate if they can even make use of that amount of hormone. So sometimes you see higher numbers are actually correlated with lower sensitivity to those hormones. So your body, the response it makes is I need to make more to then achieve adequate receptor activation that another guy maybe gets at a lower number. You know what I mean? So the number doesn't always represent better. It's just in the context of you, like, yeah, a higher IGF-1 for you would be more muscle than a 240, or for you, a 700 total T would be probably a little bit better than a 515. But for the next guy, or comparing anyone to any other people, it doesn't like match up like that.
And you can't test. Well, I mean, there's no reasonable way to test androgen receptor density.
Like not in an easy way for no. But like, ultimately, like we just see the representation and results of individuals though. And I think that's like, you could take fucking gear and see how much you blow up. That would be a way to test, you know, but not everyone's going to do that, obviously. Let's see. Vitamin D looks good to me. Lipoprotein little a. This is one of the most progressive metrics for cardiovascular disease progression for atherosclerosis, and this number being undetectable is really in your favor for plaque buildup. So this is great to see. C-reactive protein, this is a measure of inflammation in your body, and we like to see less than a 0.3 in general. So the fact you're at 0.23 is good. It means that your lifestyle and or genetics in unison with your lifestyle are at least conducive enough to have a like low inflammatory systemically. So low inflammation systemically is obviously good for avoiding disease progression, and how much that ties into certain like atherosclerosis and whatnot is kind of up for debate. But ultimately, we want inflammation acutely at certain times, like around our workouts, we induce inflammation. That's like kind of what dictates the muscle growth response and signaling to your body that you need to, you know, recover and like build more tissue to accommodate that increased like stress on the muscle. And that's why certain things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs kind of are inhibitory towards muscle growth. But having this C-reactive protein on the bottom end on like a non-training day, you just went in randomly. Like, this looks good, especially considering your sleep was shitty. So this is like representative of like good health. TMAO being high. So this is something that is typically elevated from like carnitine ingestion, red meat, supplementation with things like choline, carnitine. And you are, again, like the medical decision limits on this. This is a test not really many people get. So it's not actually that bad, at least at my general like cursory glance, because again, low, less than 6.2, you're like right in moderate range. So I guess as far as I know, does your pre-workout or anything have like carnitine in it?
No, not the pre-workout. I do eat a lot of red meat.
Okay, so that might be the reason, but the thing that makes me speculative about it is as we get later, your homocysteine fucking sky high, bro. This is like the most concerning metric on the whole test. This has nothing to do with anabolic use. This is totally health related and genetics, in my opinion. So we have a 71.3, presumably micromole per liter with a high end of 14.5. Typically, we want to see this under like 9 would be like good. So the fact you're 71.3 to me implies like either severe vitamin deficiency or like methylation impairment, which is corroborated throughout your blood work. Because if you circle back at the start, we saw the folate deficiency here. And you start to think like for guys who have, it's called MTHFR polymorphism. So it's not like a mutation in your gene where it's so like rare that almost no one has it and it's defined as a mutation. It's a polymorphism. So it's like the one I speculate you have is the same one I have, which is like less than 4% of the population, I think, has it. And it's like such an impairment in like you have low folate levels. B12 is typically on the low end. Homocysteine is high, and your methylation is impaired. Methylation is like your body's ability to turn on and off genes, and to as well as your ability to process a lot of these nutrients. So like a breakdown of the actual. Let me see if I can screen share it.
You know what? I have 3 brothers. My one brother that's very genetically similar to me, he did genetic testing, and he had the
MTHFR,
the morphism of the MTFHR gene.
Okay, yeah. So like, there's a few. There's different ones. They're not all the same, but the one that is the most problematic, it's called C67T. Let me see if I can bring up the actual SNP that you need to check. So it's basically, if you got like 23andMe done, for example, you would check, it's called RS1801133 is the SNP. Basically, it's the single nucleotide. It's kind of, I feel like I'm going to be rambling into like scientific terminology that people don't even understand. But the gene that you want to check for is MTHFR, and you want to check for, you just type in on the search bar of the 23andMe, like, I don't know, like gene, like they have a little search bar you can like nail down, actually searching for a specific gene that encodes for something. You would check this marker RS1801133, and that is the C677T polymorphism if you have it. So there you would see a genotype. I should fucking just screen share this. I'm just trying to figure out how I can bring it up here.
Was your homocysteine elevated when you weren't on folate?
Yeah, so I take creatine, betaine, methylfolate, choline, and I ensure adequate B12 intake as well. Those are all things that help bring it down. So like basically the explanation of how this whole thing works is like the C677T1 results in like 10 to 20% of the efficiency in processing folic acid, which the result of that is high homocysteine, low B12 and folate levels because your body's so inefficient at it essentially. So supplementing with methylfolate specifically, not folic acid, would be recommended if you're not getting enough from your diet. So that would be like 400 micrograms is kind of like the gold standard of supplementation for that. In addition, providing your body with adequate methyl groups, because basically you have this cycling process where your body recycles homocysteine to methionine as well as converts choline to betaine. So like a lot of these things people might actually see in supplements, like betaine is an osmolyte that helps performance in the gym. Choline is the precursor to acetylcholine, which is like, you know, neurotransmitter function that is otherwise crucial for, you know, mental clarity, flexibility, information retention, memory formation. And these things can get depleted when you are essentially impeding your body's ability to cycle through these things properly because you have inadequate methyl donors or folate to actually do the process properly. So when nutrient needs aren't met fully, the body depends on this conversion or recycling of homocysteine to methionine equally to converting choline to betaine. You can end up depleting one or the other if you are MTHFR homozygous for C670, which means basically your 23andMe would show on that SNP marker that I talked about, it would show a genotype of A-A. This is really, I know, like hard to fucking wrap your head around if I can't visually show you, but at the same time, I have like my screen share. I'm trying to not like have like random shit on my computer pop up. I'm just trying to keep it on my fucking
and only 4% have that morphism that like is 10 or 20% absorption or
yeah, I believe so. It might be more prevalent than that, but apparently in Europeans, especially, like I'm half Italian. For me, it's like very, very common among Italians. And I don't know about what other populations or like areas of Europe that it's common, but it's like in general, I believe found most prominently in European ancestry. But basically, if you can't create enough methylfolate, your body like ramps up the use of other things like betaine and choline to give those methyl groups, which then allow your body to methylate, turn genes on and off, which is like your response to, you've talked about epigenetics before, like turning genes on and off. That sort of process is dictated by this pathway. So for you and we have like a very impaired ability to do that adequately. And as we age, that process will get like really fucking shitty if we don't supplement properly or eat the proper foods appropriate to our deficiencies. So,
and there's a 5. It's methylfolate, B12, betaine, creatine, choline.
Yeah, I'm going through one of my old articles right now, actually, to double check I'm not missing any. But in general, like some of the things that might happen downstream is choline depletion leads to impaired cognitive function. So getting enough choline through like eggs are good, or you can supplement with like I use alpha GPC often through my nootropic formula as well. Betaine is a very, very good for performance as well as for supporting this methylation process. Creatine, I think everyone who is natural or not, it's like the most tried and true ergogenic aid from a supplementation perspective, having like 5 grams of creatine. Some people who weigh more might be able to benefit from more than that, but in general, like 3 to 5 grams of creatine is like a gold standard and supports. There's like so much new data coming out supporting that it helps with neurological health, fertility, a bunch of different shit that is worthwhile to supplement with it above and beyond the performance in the gym. As well, like your methylfolate intake, ensuring you're hitting your needs. It could be through supplementation if your diet is like dialed in right now. Like this is the whole need for supplementation, is if you have a diet that's like you don't want to change it and then you supplement on top of it, like this is where the use of like a single methylfolate supplement might be useful, where the use of a betaine anhydrous might be useful. Like for you, it's represented pretty fucking clearly. Your folate's low. B12, I would say, is like low normal. And then your homocysteine is like sky fucking high. So I would speculate if you added in 5 grams of creatine, maybe a few grams of betaine, 400 micrograms of methylfolate. If you wanted to, like, you could swap some things for eggs in your diet if you felt that it was, satiating enough still to stick to your diet model. But if you don't want to do that, you could just add in like an alpha GPC or CDP choline for your choline donor. And those things should help a lot and help bring your homocysteine way down. So those are things I would definitely look at implementing, to be honest.
And homocysteine, that's like not one you want elevated.
No. So that is something that is definitely contributing to cardiovascular disease. It's oftentimes like indicative of vitamin deficiency, just as a proxy on paper. So the whole process itself is like your ability to methylate impaired can be problematic for cardiovascular disease. And it is just kind of like a proxy to assess, like I'm probably deficient in a bunch of different vitamins because I'm having an impaired ability to clear this out of the blood, essentially. So like for me, the 71 is like so sky high that it's like 100% representative of impaired methylation. So for me, I don't even think it's worthwhile necessarily to see if you have the gene polymorphism in a test. I think we can probably like guess, like your brother has it, the blood metrics support it. And even if you didn't have it, like these are the steps that I would take personally to fix that. So I would want to see this at least like in the single digits by your next test. So I would add those supplements in. You might benefit from a methyl B12 supplement too, like methylcobalamin, I believe it is.
Right.
Because again, like you're eating red meat, like you're getting a fucking steak in a day or whatever it is. And if you're not getting enough B vitamins still, like maybe you benefit from a bit of B12 supplementation. So that might be something to look at potentially. And then from
I've done B12 shots before when I was like younger.
Injections I don't think are necessary. I think that's kind of like probably, I would have to look into the science, but I'm pretty sure that's just like marketing potentially. Yeah. Or if hypothetically, if you had such a deficiency, you needed to get it like elevated fast. Yeah, an injection I could understand because you're like fucking mega dosing it right into your circulation. But for you, like your B12 is normal. It's just low normal. So like I'd want to see it more like closer to the high end of normal personally. So those are the things I would do to address that. And I think that in itself, I don't know if you're going to see like an uptick in performance necessary, but maybe like mental clarity and your overall health, at least, will be fixed, to a certain extent. So that was like the primary thing I was concerned with when I saw it. Now I would keep an eye on the TMAO though, because especially when you're supplementing with things like choline, that can elevate TMAO in the gut too. So that would be something to keep an eye on to see if that gets like elevated in unison with this new supplementation regimen. But overall, I think that is the move. So, do you have any questions on like the MTHFR stuff that we could like dig into further?
Do I have any questions on which stuff? The
MTHFR, like the folate being low, the B12, the homocysteine being high.
No, I mean, that's helpful. I did pick up methylfolate like 5 days ago. I've been taking it, and
okay.
I think I've noticed a mental difference.
Yeah, people who have low folate, especially, like there's so many random things that can go wrong. Like sometimes people, they end up with like migraines. Also like defects in children, in women who are low, who have this polymorphism and they don't supplement with like methylfolate or have an adequate amount through their diet, they could end up with like neural tube defects in their fucking children. Like there's a lot of things that go into it that I think get overlooked. And like, this is why it's critical to be like, I think most people above and beyond the hitting their macros, there's something called chronometer.com. And it's like a more advanced version of MyFitnessPal. And there you can plug your diet in and it actually shows you if you're hitting your RDAs for B vitamins, for nutrients, for minerals, for vitamins, blah, blah, blah. That I think is probably useful for people who don't know if their diet is like truly balanced. So it's not just about hitting your fat needs, your macros. That's important. And like the base, like foundation of if your diet's like good, but actual nutrients are like the things that are cofactors for producing hormones and making sure your health is not getting fucked up. So if you have a deficiency in something as basic as folate, you can see how it could impair something as dramatic as your homocysteine being literally like over 7x, or it should be, which downstream would be. And it's like, you're a fucking, this is not representative of like bad health. Like this is just a random weird genetic predisposition that some people have. And you would never know if you didn't get your blood tested. So this is like why it's prudent to get diagnostics, even if you're like the most fucking yoked, lean, sick, natural, like in the industry, you know, like it doesn't, that sort of thing is just because you're metabolically healthy and you're lean, you're sub 10%, your test is good, you're strong. It doesn't mean that you're overall like guaranteed to be healthy. So it's worthwhile to get these like random biomarkers that give a more complete picture of like every organ system, or as complete of a picture as you can get. So
yeah, you know what, this one's really, really cool to see. And I was looking in that the low B12, the low folate, it's common in depression. And if that folate's too low, it can mess up with serotonin production, stuff like that. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So getting into the rest of the blood test stuff, metrics here, uric acid looks good. Phosphorus being a bit high, I would, like you have no supplements that have phosphorus in it, presumably.
No.
Okay. And it could have been like something you had in your diet like the day before that artificially elevated it. Like sometimes I'll see B12 levels that are too high because somebody had an energy drink that had like 42,000% of the amount of B12 that's like the RDA in it. And they think they have cancer or something, when in reality it's just like something they ate. So I would get a follow-up on this, but I'm assuming it's diet related. It could be intertwined into this whole methylation cycle that if we support it, like maybe it just corrects itself. But I don't have an answer necessarily as to why it's high. I would just keep an eye on it. If it's elevated more than one time, that's where you kind of dial in and be like, okay, like what the fuck is going on here? But I think a lot of this stuff should correct itself. Like the, the alkaline phosphatase being low. The specific gravity, I think, was just a dilution error probably. And the phosphorus being high was the main one that I think we would be most concerned about to check on again, because it's not low, it's high.
I was reading that, like, you know, if your magnesium or zinc is too low, that phosphorus, like it helps, the high magnesium and zinc helps bring that down. So I think my magnesium is good, but for some reason I've done a nutrient test before years ago, and my zinc, even though I eat quite a bit of meat, my zinc was fairly low.
So one thing, like if you're like, your diet's pretty flexible, so I don't know how much your diet changes, but whatever like a normal day is for you, I think it could be worthwhile even for you just to plug it into Chronometer and be like, how much zinc am I getting? And just like see, because sometimes you could be surprised. You might be deficient as fuck in like one thing. And then if you supplement with it, you can correct it and like fix a whole like slew of things that as a byproduct of that one mineral being low, like could fuck you up somehow. Like some people that are low in magnesium, they have like fucked up blood pressure. Then years of fucked up blood pressure results in them having like kidney degeneration or a heart problem or whatever. So that sort of thing is definitely worthwhile in my opinion. Like your diet's probably as balanced as you could get with the amount of calories you're eating and whatnot, and like the way you've allocated your macros, but maybe you need zinc supplementation. Like it would be worthwhile to plug it in potentially and see. So progesterone being high, this is like pretty uncommon. Because this is something that is like it's not like crazy high. It's not like you have like female fucking territory levels or something, but I'm not concerned about this at all. I think it's transient. Just sometimes when you get like an elaborate panel at that snapshot in time, you might have something elevated or slightly decreased that otherwise would be like dead smack in the middle. And it could be just a result of your body's like current phase of producing hormones in your testicles and like converting certain hormones to what. And for a transient period of time, you have an elevated amount until they dip down, until your brain just spit out more. And then boom, that snapshot in time just happened to represent a 10% boost on your blood test or something. So for me, I'm not too concerned about this. Again, this is not representative of hormone use at all. So it's kind of irrelevant, but potentially worthwhile to look at again, but I'm not like concerned about it or anything. Insulin 1.3, we already went over that. That is a sign of like extreme insulin sensitivity, metabolic health, from what I can tell. I would definitely get it checked again at like right when you wake up and see what it's at. But this could just be too, because you woke up, your glucose levels are at its highest when you wake up from, it's called the dawn phenomenon, when your cortisol is at its highest and your glucose is elevated, and you fast for a long time. So maybe as you're going deeper into your fasting window, you've ate nothing. So your insulin is just like rock bottom because it doesn't need to be high to pull glucose back down. So ultimately it is representative of like, this is one of the main metrics we look at for metabolic health, and it looks really good. TPO, this is a thyroid antibody that we would want to look at more so if you had like a weird thyroid level and see if you have like an autoimmune response that is like attacking your thyroid gland and destroying it. And for you, it's just part of the elaborate panel, but it's not like I was really concerned about it for you or anything. So as expected, like undetectable. T3 looks good. It's like right in the middle. It's not like, it's not high, it's not low. Like this is the main dictating factor from a hormonal perspective of your metabolism. So this T3 level is right where I'd want to see it personally. SHBG, I think we covered that elaborately already. And then this NMR lipo profile is just a kind of visual representation of your lipids and how ideal they are, which I think we already touched on pretty elaborately way back at the start when I interpreted them. And again, I'm not a lipidologist or a cardiologist, so I'm just going based on my cursory glance of the, data and whatnot. But ultimately, everything looks natural for what I can tell, based on all the factors I've outlined already. The only thing from a health perspective that's concerning is the methylation support. So I think that you would definitely benefit highly from the betaine, the creatine, the choline, potentially through diet or supplementation, and the methylfolates and B12. I think those would be, and specifically methyl B12 rather than like there's like different versions you can get. So it's kind of like methylfolate versus folic acid. There's like an equivalency for B12, the methylated, like activated version. So yeah, I think that's it, man. So
yeah, I'm gonna get back on, doing 5 grams creatine. I'm gonna check out the butane. I haven't I haven't heard too much of that one. That one looks pretty interesting. So I'll check that one out. And then I have methylfolate and the B12, and I have some alpha GPC. So yeah, I'm gonna hit that. It feels good to not just take random supplement, like different. So it feels good to take supplements that like you're
targeted approach, as opposed to just like randomly taking a fucking tons of shit.
Yeah, no, it feels so. I mean, I'm actually pumped to take those, knowing that I have that elevated homocysteine and they're low. I'm glad that we did this, and I was able to share those levels. I'm definitely curious to see total testosterone, free testosterone, and some of those things when my after getting really good sleep and then seeing what the homocysteine's at. So I appreciate it, man. It was really valuable. I wouldn't have been able to basically figure out all that stuff. I saw the folate was low. I bought folic acid, and then you told me in the Instagram DM to get the methylfolate.
Yeah.
So
yeah, awesome. And I'm glad we were able to make something, educational out of it, above and beyond the just like assessing fucking natty status stuff, and potentially able to help your health in some capacity. And we can do a follow-up after you've done this for a certain amount of weeks and kind of try and correct things and then kind of go from there. And if anyone wants to check out the diagnostics, they can get their own panels at merrickhealth.com and have have providers and patient care coordinators help interpret them and give them guided recommendations, just like we did here, except with like licensed, providers. So definitely recommend that for anyone. Like, again, you notice Greg is like the healthiest fucking guy, like super lean, super athletic, high performance. And even he has random things that we only could have found through blood testing. So it's definitely worthwhile to get, even if you're a young, healthy guy. So, down the line, you're not building up to some like cardiovascular disease outcome or some kidney fucking issue or whatever that you could have corrected quickly and easily should you have got like proper proactive diagnostics to begin with. So
yeah, and I gotta be hyper careful. Like in my family, we do have quite a bit of disease. So like, and I'm 30 now, so like I'm like I gotta be like hyper careful on this thing.
What
so,
disease?
Cancer,
Heart?
MS.
No.
Yeah. So I gotta be like, I gotta.
It makes you wonder though, like how much of this played into that as well for the genetic predispositions, because obviously this is hereditary, right? So could be worthwhile to impart this information on your family too, because they probably have the exact same shit.
Yeah, there is a I think there's a correlation with the MTHFR, morphism, low folate, and multiple sclerosis and stuff like that. So there's definitely, I gotta be, my siblings, I've got to be like, on the ball.